Welcome to the Central Imperial Archive. You have selected the Chaos Knights entry. Warning: the information is provided for reference purposes only. These data have been digitized from ancient chronicles known as codices. Chaos Knights tower over the battlefield, akin to gods of war forged from iron. These bipedal machines of destruction, controlled by aristocrats who have rejected the authority of the Imperium, are among the most formidable opponents in the entire galaxy. The roar of tortured engines and warp-infused microservos precedes the coming of the Chaos Knights. With vast strides, the gargantuan machines draw ever closer to their quarry, their trudging footfalls sending quakes through the shattered earth. Long shadows extend before them, shrouding their enemies in darkness, whilst suffocating plumes of plasmic exhaust pour down from maw-like vents. Those marked for death by the Knights are gripped by the inescapable truth that their doom approaches. And as they open fire upon the towering machines, the last of their hope evaporates. Flickering ion shields absorb the incoming fire, energy blasts dissipating and artillery shells exploding harmlessly before they can strike their targets. Undaunted, the Knights continue their ominous march. Their bristling weapons systems grind into firing positions, and with thunderous cracks they unleash annihilation upon the foe. Enormous melter weapons shoot beams of searing heat that erupt into fiery novas, immolating infantry and reducing armoured vehicles to bubbling slag. Monstrous battle cannons rain hails of explosive shells upon the foe, detonating with enough force to crack open a ferrocrete bunker. Rockets and missiles streak through the skies towards the most threatening opponents, annihilating these priority targets with punishing swiftness. Those enemies not instantly obliterated by the opening barrage are cut down by blinding bursts of laser weaponry, or atomized by the Knights' plasma-fueled armaments. As the survivors desperately seek to hold the line, the Knights fire streams of solid shot that tear through flesh and armor, leaving only shredded corpses and a thick crimson mist where soldiers once rallied. Those who do not flee as the titanic machines approach are blasted apart at close range, immolated by jets of burning promethium or simply ground to pulp beneath slab-like feet. Looming over their enemies, the Knights swing their colossal chainswords in reaping arcs. Jagged adamantine teeth saw through tank hulls with contemptuous ease and liquefy the hapless crews inside. Other Knights use thunderstrike gauntlets to pulverize their foes, crushing war machines to scrap within their obliterating grip, or using the energy-wreathed fists like wrecking balls to batter aside all resistance. Each Chaos Knight is an unhallowed relic of humanity's ancient past. They are twisted reflections of the Imperial Knights, corrupted in form and spirit by fell sorceries, dark worship, and malefic re-engineering. The Knight suits were first created using standard template constructs during the dark age of technology, and many have survived through the innumerable wars that have characterized the long millennia since. For generations uncounted, the colossal war machines have been piloted by nobles, aristocratic warriors possessed of enough physical, mental, and spiritual fortitude to survive the ritual of becoming, commune with the throne mechanicum at each walker's heart, and thus bond with their knight suit. In the case of Chaos Knights, such rituals are tainted by warp entities, malefic sorceries, and the perversions of the nobles themselves. At first the knight may appear unchanged, but in its core the irrevocable process of rot has already begun. Over Terran years or even centuries, chaos energies seep into the war engine, torturing its machine spirit and mutating its mechanical form. Where once the suit and its pilot were a gleaming beacon of imperial honor, the Chaos Knight and its fallen noble comprise a symbiotic beast of unfettered wrath and base hatred. A noble is enabled to pilot their war machine by being wired into an arcane contraption that is implanted into their knight's cockpit. A throne mechanicum in the larger knight, or a helm mechanicum in the smaller classes. Neural jacks and cerebral uplinks connect the pilot's nervous system to the device, allowing them to directly interface with the machinery of their steed. Consequently, actuators and omni-motivators are driven by streams of hateful thoughts, whilst sensory information and multispectrum auspex relays feed back into the noble's mind with burning clarity. Within each throne mechanicum are the spectral neural echoes of its previous former pilots, screaming techno-geists whose suffering increases exponentially as the night to which they are bonded grows ever more warped. Only the most indomitable fallen nobles are able to commune with a throne mechanicum. Those that do are able to spur their Chaos Knight into action by inimical will alone. Nobles who are wired into a Helm mechanicum are similarly twisted by chaos energies that have been absorbed by their war engine. The Helms also yoke these pilots' mind and soul to the will of their knightly overlords. Since the Horus heresy, thousands of individual knights and even whole knight houses have fallen to chaos. Each instance of treachery is a monumental blow to the Imperium. The nobles and their knight suits are not only crucial cogs in humanity's war machine, they are considered to be among the most unshakably loyal servants of the Emperor. The mere suggestion that a noble could forswear their vows and fight against the Imperium's servants is tantamount to blasphemy. It is whispered that the Departamento Munitorum has had Imperial officers executed for heresy rather than acknowledge their claims that they have done battle with turncoat nobles. Yet the terrifying reality is that Chaos Knights bent on anarchy and slaughter march upon the Emperor's realm in ever greater numbers. Fallen nobles embark on campaigns of destruction for many reasons. Some do so to conquer territory in the name of the baleful deities they worship. Others have sworn fealty to the Dark Mechanicum, the heretic Astartes or powerful demonic entities, and answer the dread summons of war whenever they are called upon. Others still are driven by insanity and profane visions, launching quests to upend the very fabric of existence and transform the galaxy into a twisted hellscape. During planetary battles, these machines of destruction such as these can traverse vast distances amidst toxic or radioactive contamination without hesitation, all to reach the enemy. When their wars stretch beyond a single world, many of their kind use corrupted Dark Mechanicum explorator craft and mass conveyance barges to transport themselves to the front lines. On the most warp-drenched battlefields, the horrific war engines have even been known to storm forth from tears in reality, emerging from local warp rifts called into being by the powers of chaos. A single Chaos Knight has as much resilience and firepower as a small army. Those that have turned upon or even butchered the rest of their knightly household are termed Dreadblades by the Ordo Hereticus. They typically operate as lone wolves and mercenaries, lending their immense might to heretical warlords in exchange for powerful relics, arcane knowledge or fief planets upon which they can enact their cruelties. Dreadblades are often followed into battle by hordes of warriors, chaos space marines who revere the knight's destructive potential, and throngs of chaos cultists who worship the machines as manifestations of their dark god's will. At other times, multiple Dreadblades will gather together, focusing their disparate fury towards a single malefic purpose. The nightmares driving a knight to become a Dreadblade Knight are as varied as the currents of chaos itself. Some are lured onto the path of damnation by illusions and deceit. Others become wandering warriors due to escalating madness. There are also knights who choose a solitary and brutal life of their own volition, seeking vengeance and fulfilling an oath of murder. A warrior who turns away from the Imperium and their family becomes an outcast forever, but becomes all the more dangerous. Nothing prevents a Dreadblade Knight free from the oaths of loyalty and service from pursuing personal ambitions, travelling from one theatre of war to another, or stalking across the galaxy anyone who has slighted their twisted honour. A great deal of Dreadblades hail from houses that are still loyal to the Imperium and the Omnissiah. During the Horus heresy, when the rest of their houses sided with the Loyalists, individual knights felt honour-bound to maintain their fealty to the traitors. Countless such schisms occurred across the galaxy, and though many of the rebelling knights were permanently silenced in titanic duels, others disappeared into the stars, only to re-emerge alongside the armies of the Warmaster Horus. Other knights who become Dreadblades are those captured in battle, their allies wiped out and their suits damaged to the point that they can no longer fight. Handed over to the heretics of the Dark Mechanicum, a long and horrific fate awaits these warriors. Their minds and souls are gradually shattered through the use of sorcerous torture and demonic rituals. Notions of loyalty and honor are replaced with the depraved ideals of their captors and a screaming desire for carnage. Then there are those dreadblades who, over the course of long and bloody campaigns, have lost the ability to perceive the path of righteousness. Surrounded by so much slaughter, their only notions of honor are tied to the killing strike of their blade or the obliterative blast of their rapid-fire battle cannon. Many such dreadblades are completely unaware that they have fallen from grace, their single-mindedness blinding them to the atrocities that they so wantonly commit. But even more terrifying than the individualistic dreadblades are the night houses that have fallen in their entirety to chaos. Those that have sided with traitor Titan legions and the Dark Mechanicum are known as infernal houses in the Imperium. They use techno-sorcery and summoned demonic entities to bolster the already formidable capabilities of their night suits. Other knightly courts, known as iconoclast houses, have more varied heretical allegiances. Some have maintained oaths of fealty to heretic Astartes legions or the dark gods themselves, whereas others have renounced their allegiance to the Imperium to carve out their own dread empires. The history of the Chaos Knights stretches back into the dark recesses of humanity's past. Long before the Emperor arose on Terra and forged the Imperium of Man, the Knights had established their bastions on worlds across the galaxy. Through countless horrors and long millennia they endured. But even they were not immune to the corruptions of the warp. The first night houses were established shortly after humanity began expanding its domain into the stars. Groups of colonists struck out from Terra aboard Long March generation ships, traveling for solar decades or even Terran centuries through the cold void of space to reach their destination worlds. Countless colonists were lost to empiric disasters and navigational errors, while those who arrived successfully upon their new planets were faced with all manner of extreme hardships. Some worlds were battered by savage electrical storms or burned with unrelenting volcanic activity. Others were bathed in exotic radiation, covered in carnivorous flora, or infested with strange pathogens that decimated the new arrivals. Many planets played host to sentient indigenous species who violently resisted human encroachment, leading to bloody wars for supremacy. Yet the hardiest groups of colonists not only endured but thrived in their new environments. Using standard template construct technology, the pioneers were able to fabricate the structures and machines they needed to assert their dominance over their new planet. Each STC database could replicate a specific creation, repeatedly and without fail. In this way, the colonists built vast habitats to shield them from the ravages of their planet's atmosphere and devices to reconstitute life-giving essentials such as food, water, and breathable air. In many cases, the vessels that had transported the colonists through space were transformed into fortified enclaves that in time formed the basis for mighty fastnesses. This allowed for the creation of heavy mining tools, refineries, and processing plants with which the wealth of the new worlds could be rapidly exploited. STCs were used to create devastating machines capable of annihilating hostile alien races that offered resistance or invaded the burgeoning human domains. The first night suits were both tools of settlement and weapons of war, equally as capable of sawing down towering trees and crossing inimical environments as they were of gunning down hostile Xenos. Only the most skilled and forceful individuals were equal to the task of operating the night suits, and it was to these warriors that the other colonists turned to for protection and eventually leadership. Long bloodlines of pilots emerged, and they were subtly mentally conditioned by the systems of their throne's mechanicum to become ever more stringent and authoritarian. These were the nobles of the first night houses. The planets over which they ruled grew insular, rejecting new advancements in technology in favor of the traditions established and enforced by the nobles. Due to their isolationist cultures, the night worlds diverged from the path taken by the rest of humanity, and in doing so were saved from the nightmares that followed. As rapidly as humanity expanded into the stars, the collapse of its galactic domain was even swifter. Vast distances between settled worlds led to the emergence of divergent cultures, and with these came rapid genetic evolution and mutation. Individuals emerged with the ability to sense and manipulate the tumultuous warp that existed parallel to real space. On some worlds, these so-called psychers were mercilessly persecuted, being hunted down and slaughtered wherever they were found. But on many, they were revered and allowed to rule over their mundane kin. Alongside psychers came other subspecies of mankind, abhumans, whose genetic pool had been irrevocably tainted by the environments in which they dwelt. Interstellar wars broke out as the ideologies of neighboring systems grew ever more incompatible. Sentient machines turned violently on the masters they had been built to serve. Entire planets were overrun by Xenos armies, and as worlds burned, many of the wonders of the age of technology were lost forever. With the seething tumult came warp storms that tore through the void of space. Routes of contact between humanity's manifold domains were severed, leaving distant regions cut off from one another. Their denizens were forced to face the horrors that befell them in isolation. Nevertheless, the night worlds fared better than most in this time of terror and darkness. The noble houses had swiftly purged mutations that had developed amongst their subjects, and had strangled branches of their own family trees, where genetic deviance had appeared. From the first, they had rejected thinking machines, trusting instead to hard work and personal sacrifice to make their planets strong, and so were largely spared from the rampages of the Men of Iron during the cybernetic revolt. When the Great Crusade spread across the galaxy in the late 30th millennium, a great number of night worlds were reunited with the rest of humanity. Vast fleets set out from Terra to find the remnants of mankind that were scattered amongst the stars, and to bring them under the aegis of the Emperor of Mankind. Many of the worlds to which the Great Crusade came were ruled over by obstinate tyrants, warlords and despots who had risen to power during the anarchy of the Age of Strife, and who refused to humble themselves before the Emperor's might. These regimes were ended with brutal swiftness, crushed by the armies of the burgeoning Imperium. The first account of a night world being rediscovered came from a rogue trader named Jeffers. His reports to the Administratum noted both the formidable technology of the night suits as well as the loyalty and staunchness of the nobles who piloted them. In the years that followed, hundreds of other night worlds were encountered and brought into the fold. Most noble houses were quick to swear fealty to the leaders of the Great Crusade, for in the Imperium they saw their own values of order and duty implemented on an incomparably grand scale. Amongst the myriad organizations that made up the Great Crusade, it was the Mechanicum of Mars that was most successful in securing oaths of fealty from the night houses. The Martian tech priests coveted the ancient archaeotech that existed on these planets and were eager to exploit the rich mineral wealth of the various night worlds. Many noble families swore their service to the Mechanicum, though others gave their loyalty directly to Terra and the Emperor. Regardless of who they pledged themselves to, the knights loyally answered the call to war whenever it came. In return, the sacristan orders who tended to the knights were inducted into the secrets of the Omnissiah, regaining many lost secrets of mechanical artifice that allowed them to better serve their masters. The Great Crusade saw worlds across the length and breadth of the galaxy brought under the Emperor's almighty rule. But at its zenith, the Imperium was shattered by treachery. The Imperial Warmaster Horus and fully half of the Space Marine legions succumbed to the corruptions of the Dark Gods, and in the name of chaos, launched an apocalyptic campaign against the Imperium. The galaxy was riven by civil war. The Legiones Astartes slaughtered their erstwhile allies, worlds were incinerated by teeming armies of heretics, and the light of hope carried forth by the Emperor was replaced by bitter darkness. It was during this time that the first knights fell to chaos. Indeed, the majority of the night worlds fought aggressively to stem the tide of heresy, putting down any rebellious elements within their own societies before joining in the battle alongside the loyalist Space Marine legions. Due to their sheer power and unflagging loyalty, the knights were crucial to the Imperial war effort on countless bloody battlefields. Yet it was this same loyalty that led some to side with the arch-enemy. Innumerable Mechanicum Forge worlds sided with Horus, as did many of the night houses that had sworn undying fealty to the tech priests of those worlds. As the Dark Mechanicum delved deeper into the arts of profane techno-sorcery, so too were the knights in their service tainted by chaos. Rune-marked knights marched to war alongside traitor Titan legions, unleashing devastation upon the defenders of the Imperium. Other fallen houses upheld their oaths to Space Marine legions that turned traitor. The nobles of these houses followed their own codes of conduct to the letter, serving without question and answering all calls to war, and in doing so placed themselves on the path to damnation. Still other knights turned upon their own houses and renounced all ties to their bloodlines. Some were swayed by the whispering of malefic entities in their dreams, whereas others were bound to the will of the dark gods through sorcerous rituals. Thus were the Chaos Knights born, and in the 100 centuries since they have continued to spread death and terror throughout the stars. Where each loyalist knight represents a long history of honor and self-sacrifice, the Chaos Knights come from a lineage of horror and depravity. Only through unspeakable atrocities and malefic rituals were these knightly lines able to be corrupted, and the tally of slaughter has only been added to since their fall. For a noble to bond with their throne mechanicum is a harrowing process. Only the most worthy individuals, women and men possessed of formidable physical, mental, and even spiritual strength, are able to survive the ritual of becoming. Those who do are forever changed. In the fastness of each noble house, there is a sacred room known as the Chamber of Echoes. Within the Chamber of Echoes, the would-be pilot is wired into a throne mechanicum and left in isolation so that their worth may be judged. Residing inside the throne mechanicum are the Geist-like remnants of each of its former occupants. Every one of these electro-spirits was once a noble, and it is they who assess the new supplicant's worth. Coursing through the neural sockets directly into the noble's mind, they are able to pry open the supplicant's innermost thoughts and closely guarded secrets. The ritual lasts long and terrible hours, and those nobles who are found wanting are utterly consumed by the process. But those who are deemed worthy are bonded eternally with the throne mechanicum and with the digital echoes of their forebears who dwell inside it. The ritual of becoming is not only the means by which a noble becomes a pilot, it is a necessary defense against corruption. A throne mechanicum is a shield to prevent the awesome power of a knight being wielded by one capable of treachery. From the moment they become, a pilot's thoughts are influenced by their throne, even when they do not sit upon it. Notions of fealty, obligation, and hierarchy are emblazoned at the forefront of the pilot's mind, as is a deep and undivided respect for the noble's ancestors and their household traditions. Such organic mental conditioning should make treachery impossible, but the will of the dark gods is strong, and their corruptions truly insidious. The pilots of the first iconoclast households had already become before the start of the Horus heresy. The enormity of the Imperium's fracturing had devastating effects on those night houses whose allegiances lay with the traitors. As the heretical war spread across the galaxy, the ghosts within hundreds of thrones mechanicum howled in anguish, their imprinted spirits tortured by the impossibility of upholding their honor in the face of their traitor masters' deeds of betrayal whilst maintaining their loyalty. The neural outcry was such that some nobles were driven insane by it, while others suffered gruesome cerebral hemorrhages. However, the vast majority of turncoat nobles, were subjected to immense torments. They were ceaselessly assaulted by feelings of shame and hatred, their every negative emotion amplified and echoed by the ancestral spirits of their thrones mechanicum. According to the Code Chivalric, failure to perform one's duty is a transgression that can only be absolved through selfless service. As such, these knights fought all the harder for their treacherous lieges. At the commands of their heretical lords, lances of Chaos Knights tore bloody paths through the Imperium's armies. Once honorable nobles led attacks to desecrate cities and enslave the populations of entire planets. Kilometers-high statues dedicated to the Emperor were toppled by knights' ceaseless bombardments, and in their place profane monuments were erected to glorify the cruelties of the dark gods. These attempts to quell their self-loathing through unquestioning service only added further fuel to the fire. The knights were compelled towards greater extremes of brutality and further depths of depravity, and with their every debased action, the screams of their throne mechanicum grew louder. Over time, the Chaos Knights became unrecognizable as the valiant warriors they once were. Some had transformed into incarnations of carnage. They hacked their way through the steel and flesh of their foes, seeking only to drown their unrelenting anguish in oceans of blood. Others became agents of instability, their motivations and allegiances upended constantly by the hateful tempests that raged in their souls. The growing insanity that festered inside each Chaos Knight corroded their notions of chivalry, twisting concepts of honor and duty into new and nightmarish ideals. These fallen nobles justified the most heinous atrocities they committed in the traitor's name, reasoning that they had been bred to be exemplars of virtue. So every action they took must therefore be virtuous. Whilst incinerating the defenders of an imperial bastion, a renegade knight would conclude that such measures must be necessary, for otherwise their codes of virtue would not allow them to immolate their victims. By the same grotesque logic, if roasting alive 100 imperial soldiers was an act of honor, then there could be no greater honor than seeing the entire galaxy set ablaze. The tortures endured by each Chaos Knight pilot served to permanently corrupt their throne mechanicum. Upon their death, the imprinted remnants of a fallen noble remained in their throne, where their twisted visions of virtue spread to the other spectral echoes like a rampant digital infection. No longer would the throne serve to shield the pilot from corruption, it now fed the depraved desires of those who would bond with it. Bloodlust, sadism and psychosis were fostered in the lines of fallen nobles that flowed from the first Chaos Knights, giving rise to the tyrannical warlords of the early iconoclast houses. However, not all knights fell to chaos in the same manner as those of the iconoclast houses. Those whose pilots had sworn allegiance to the heretics of the Dark Mechanicum were the subjects of countless dread rituals, each designed to corrupt the supposedly incorruptible technologies of the throne's Mechanicum. The true knowledge of how the thrones functioned was beyond the ken of even the most ancient magi, but the colossal military potential of the knights spurred them to conduct ever more depraved experiments. On the nightmare-forged worlds called Hell Forges, dark magi created their own grim simulacra of the Chamber of Echoes, and into these screaming oubliettes they dragged the throne's Mechanicum from captured knight suits, often with the broken and bloodied pilot still attached. Many of these chambers were lined with arcane devices that were used to bombard the captive thrones with focused warp energy. Others bristled with mechadendritic tentacles that parasitically fused themselves to the throne, and through them, demonic entities were able to surge into the host tissue of the cybernetically wired pilot. Certain sects of the Dark Mechanicum raised up base warrior champions who fought one another for the right to become. These individuals were not trained in the ways of the noble houses, but for them, the prospect of piloting a knight blinded them to the dangers of attempting to become. The results of these procedures were ubiquitously gruesome, but amidst the tortured cries, the explosions of flesh, and the scrap code howls of the tainted thrones, the magi of the Dark Mechanicum gleaned volumes of morbid data. To combat the spirits dwelling within, techno-priests developed secret procedures, such as summoning spectrophage demons that consumed the echoes of former owners, or clogging with pathogenic scrap code. In rare cases, the Magi used their technologies to open interstitial warp rifts inside the ancient circuitry clusters. Though only a fraction of the knight suits and thrones that were captured survived these torturous experiments, those that did were corrupted beyond redemption, as were any pilots unfortunate enough to survive. Through unspeakable procedures, the Dark Mechanicum bonded these fallen nobles to their tainted war engines, thus creating the progenitors of the infernal houses who still serve the heretics today. As the night houses became ever more corrupted, so too were their worlds transformed into horrific mockeries of their former glory. Where once the denizens of these planets had looked to their nobles for leadership and protection, they were swiftly reduced to a terror-filled existence. The populations of entire cities were hunted for sport by their nightly overlords. Fallen nobles supplied tithes of living humans to their heretical lieges to be used in sadistic rituals or the forging of demonic pacts. Where once the would-be knight pilot prepared for their duty over years of training and proved their worth in solemn duels, they now engaged in competitive slaughters of their own subjects. Depraved cultures took root in every echelon of society on these Chaos Knight worlds. Teeming cults worshipped the dark gods openly, fallen nobles competing to raise the greatest fanes to the ruinous powers. The landscapes became pocked with charnel pits that overflowed with the corpses of defeated enemies. These planets that had been bastions of order throughout the Age of Strife metamorphosed into deep wells of anarchy, from which the taint of chaos seeped further into reality. Knights have continued to fall to chaos in the millennia since the Horus Heresy. Night worlds lying on the edges of raging empiric storms have been inexorably transformed by the outflow of raw warp energy. On more than one occasion, such a planet has been enveloped entirely by a nightmarish tempest, only to later re-emerge, its population devoured by demons and its war engines hideously transfigured. Other knights have slowly succumbed to corruption over the long campaigns they have fought on the side of the Imperium. After butchering endless tides of frenzied heretics for centuries without rest, the pursuit of carnage can become synonymous with duty. This is especially true for those knights fighting in isolation from their household kin, or in war zones where reality is distorted by the dread influence of chaos. Caked in the blood of 1,000 conflicts, and faced with horror in every direction, the mechanized warriors lose the ability to differentiate between ally and enemy. Even the spectral gestalt of their throne mechanicum becomes blinded by the need to kill, not caring who or what is the focus of the knight's destructive fury. Several knights thought lost in battle have later been discovered to have fallen, and to have continued their slaughters unabated. Chaos warps not only the souls of pilots, but also the knight armors themselves. The essence of the warp flows through weapon systems and ancient electronic circuits of the formidable war machines, while their tormented machine spirits howl like wounded beasts. Over time, even armor plating and numerous weapons transform beyond recognition. Chaos corruption seeded into a throne mechanicum spreads into the rest of the knight like rot. Machine spirits that drive the knight's massive actuators are bent to the insane will of the pilot and the spectral inhabitants of the throne. No longer does the war engine march with bold and purposeful strides. It's every colossal movement the result of generations of discipline and training within the noble houses. Instead, the Chaos Knight lopes forwards with predatory haste, eager to drink in the deaths of its next band of foes. Gone is the imperative to protect its allies, to form the immovable center of a defensive line or the unstoppable spear tip of a combined charge. The Chaos Knight's machine spirit cares nothing for those alongside whom it fights. Whether they live or die is of little concern, so long as it can engage in rampant slaughter. Bow waves of horror and despair roll before the advance of the Knight's desecrator. These infernal machines hunt their prey with a frightening zeal, born of malice, sparing no one, be they formidable foe or frail. Mercilessly and methodically, they crush strategic points, level any shelters to the ground, and pursue retreating enemies, desiring to destroy all without exception. Knight's Desecrator possess potent mid-to-close range armaments that lend themselves towards dueling enemy war engines or monstrous beasts, or tearing down the foe's fortifications. One limb typically ends in a taloned thunderstrike gauntlet that can be used to crush, pulverize, and rake their enemies, or even to heft the crumpled wreckage of a battle tank and hurl it bouncing and rolling through the foe to lethal effect. The Desecrator's other primary armament is the fearsome laser destructor, capable of dealing significant damage and possessing a rather large radius of effect for a focused energy emitter. Each shot is preceded by a rising banshee wail as energy flickers about the weapon's muzzle before it discharges with a crack like mountains splitting asunder. Where the laser destructor's actinic blast strikes home, armor vaporizes and flesh sublimates to steam in a heartbeat. The laser destructor is capable of coring a foot-wide hole through solid adamantium from 1,000 meters away, and the irregular overpulses that race down its beam can blast apart even the heaviest targets with sudden and unpredictable eruptions of energy. The fallen nobles who pilot Night's desecrator are all cruel despots, well disposed to imposing their tyrannical will upon others. With their war dog thralls Helms Mechanicum slave to their own throne, the fallen nobles coordinate vicious flanking moves and volleys of fire that drives their enemies from cover. So are even the best dug-in foes flushed out to be crushed beneath the Night's desecrator's trampling feet, or mowed down by their chattering point defense heavy stubbers. After all, none can be permitted to survive the Chaos Knight's wrath. Only death can remain in their wake. Night's rampagers storm into battle with frenzied metallic howls. They charge full tilt towards the foe with no thought for their own defense, servos straining, reactor dials running red and attitudinal alarms wailing as the war engines threaten to topple themselves in their desperation to reach the foe. For the fallen nobles who pilot these lunatic war engines, it is like having their minds and souls tethered to a blazing meteor. They can do little but fight to direct the bloodthirst of their night suits as best they can, and many are rapidly worn down by the experience until their sanity snaps, and they are left as little more than slavering beasts themselves. So ferocious a Night's rampager, so utterly bereft of discipline or restraint, that they are often dropped from a low-flying macro hauler directly into the thickest fighting of a war zone. Other times, they are teleported from within adamantine hex cages aboard orbiting warships, or even transported to the front lines chained into super-heavy transport frames that bind them like armoured straitjackets until it is time for their fury to be unleashed. More than one such raving war engine has broken free of its restraints en route to the front, and wrought mayhem amongst its erstwhile allies in its mindless need to sate its battle lust. For all the risks inherent in their deployment, once the Night's rampager hit the enemy lines, it is not hard to see why the fallen houses employ them in battle. These towering war engines fight less like machines and more like frenzied demons. Their carapace warps and twists, weapon limbs over-articulating in ways that should be rationally impossible for their limited mechanical frames. Adamantine sinews and hyper-stressed servos scream as the Night's rampager stab and bludgeon with their Reaper chainswords and Thunderstrike gauntlets, attacking with terrifying speed and ferocity. They rain down punishing blows that sunder the guard of even the most skilled war engine pilot, staving in the helms and chests of loyalist knights, or tearing the heads from elegant Asuriani wraith knights. The Night's rampager stab and hack with their screaming chainswords, lopping limbs off tyrannid bio-horrors before eviscerating them in gory sprays. Night's rampager have been seen to hoist war engines aloft in the grip of their Thunderstrike gauntlets before sawing them in two with their whirring blades, scoop up infantry and hurl them screaming through the air to splatter bloodily against the flanks of their own bastions, or pummel victims into the ground before tearing chunks from them and bloodily devouring them with the gnashing maws of their mutated faceplates. Throughout their berserk onslaught, the Night's rampager ignore incoming fire altogether. Their ion shields swivel and tilt, but this is likely merely the fallen nobles within attempting some modicum of self-preservation, while they let their steeds maraud at will. Charging at the forefront of every assault, fighting with inexhaustible ferocity until they are too damaged to take another stride, Night's rampager take catastrophic casualties. It is rare for a single such war engine to leave a war zone under its own power. Of course, many fallen houses count on this fact. It is far easier to haul wrecked Night's rampager from the battlefield and effect repairs than to entrap them again by force. The Night's despoiler epitomize all that it means to be a Chaos Knight. Their fallen noble pilots vehemently repudiate honor and valor in every form. The burning hatred with which they are filled comes from long exposure to their corrupted thrones mechanicum, coupled with the slow erosion of reason and purpose over decades of bloody war and endless crusade. Behind each such knight lies a long history of terror and cruelty, defined by selfish despotism and the pursuit of personal power, no matter the cost to anyone else. In silhouette, all but the most heavily mutated Knight's despoiler remain similar to the Imperial Knights they once were. However, their weapons vary wildly, Gone are the traditional patterns of armaments that have served the loyalist houses for millennia. Instead, every Knight Despoiler is armed, however its pilot chooses, or with whatever agglomeration of weaponry could be scavenged to outfit the war engine. Preferences range hugely between different fallen households and between individual dreadblades. House Mycorphus, for example, worship the plague god Nurgle and have seen their Knight's Despoiler become slowly coated in living rust. Many of their more complex weapons have failed over time, so that now the house relies on verdigrised rapid-fire battle cannons and Avenger Gatling cannons, and plague-riddled Stormspear rocket pods wherever possible. House Thrin, by comparison, hail from a savage world where the only law is that of the blade, and thus every Knight Despoiler in their ranks wields a Reaper chainsword, as melee combat is a requirement for their knights. Infernix Inglorium, meanwhile, is one of the most feared dreadblades ever to reave the battlefields of the Ishmar sector, and its twinned thermal cannons have become the stuff of dark legend amongst the Astra Militarum forces fighting there. So massive are the Knights Tyrant that they loom over even the other Chaos Knights that fight at their sides. Walking bastions of corruption, these massive suits carry the heaviest weapon systems available to the fallen houses. Their pilots delight in unleashing these armaments to their full devastating potential as they stride into battle. They often place themselves deliberately in harm's way, shrugging off the enemy's most deadly weaponry with insulting ease in order to gain the perfect firing point. These fallen nobles tend towards towering arrogance and delusions of invincibility, a result of the spiritual bleed between themselves and the tainted machine spirits of the knight suits they pilot. For the same reason, pilots of Knights Tyrant almost always become fused with their steeds, either due to an obsessive desire to become the biggest and most destructive warrior upon the battlefield, or else because they have simply been overmastered and subsumed by the beast within which they ride to war. In terms of ranged weaponry, Knights Tyrant possess a wealth of potential armaments. Volcano lances and plasma decimators make short work of even the largest and most distant armoured targets, while their demonically infused shield-breaker missiles skip through the warp itself to strike straight at the centre of any target. Conflagration cannons belch lurid warp flame or spumes of plague-ridden atomized acids that annihilate the enemy at close range. Siegebreaker cannons thump out steady bombardments to harass and wear down the foe. Meanwhile, those Knights Tyrant, armed with thundercoil harpoons, are able to lay low even the largest war engines, monsters or fortifications. The combination of a devastating initial impaling thrust, followed by macro-volt blasts of motive force before ripping chunks from the luckless victims as the harpoon is reeled back, is as messy as it is effective. Whether standing immovable in defense or marching unstoppable on the advance, the Knights Tyrant are the true heavyweights of the fallen houses. Loping forwards on powerful mechanical legs, war dogs close upon their foes like bestial predators. With each stride, the grating pant of their engines grows louder, and the shudder created by their metallic footfalls becomes more inescapable. As soon as they are in range of their prey, the war dogs open fire. Fusillades of solid shot soar through lines of infantry, while superheated blasts vaporize flesh and reduce armored targets to flaming wreckage. The most rapacious war dogs then barrel towards their reeling enemies, massacring whoever is left standing with brutal swipes their Reaper chain cleavers. Of like the Armiger-class knights, still loyal to the Imperium, war dogs are piloted by warriors hailing from the lower strata of a night world's nobility. Their purpose is to be subservient, to carry out whatever orders they are given, and to fight and die at the behest of their liege. Before falling to chaos, these warriors were renowned for carrying out their instructions with pride, dutifully adhering to the tenets of humility and compliance that had been instilled in them since birth. Now, however, corrupted by the warp as they are, they have a ravenous desire for personal glory. This is accompanied by a deep loathing for the upper echelons of their knightly household, those who lord their power over the lesser nobles. But despite the burning resentment held by the pilots, they are still bound into service by their helms mechanicum. The arcane circuitry of the helm causes personal impulses and desires to be summarily overwritten by the commands of their taskmaster, compelling the warriors into abject thraldom. Yet from the warp-infused helms, there also comes a constant stream of whispers and demonic ravings, extolling the pilot's incomparable strength and decrying the lowly position they hold in their household. This breeds thoughts of usurpation in the pilot's mind, and gives rise to dreams of the unfettered power they could wield if only they were to overthrow those who rule over them. It is this unattainable desire to be unshackled that fuels the war dog's insanity and hones their fury. In battle, war dogs are often deployed to eradicate those foes who are deemed beneath the notice of their despotic masters. Yet even the most ignominious task they carry out with savage fervour. The pain and suffering they inflict on others feeds their hatred, for through the dying screams of their enemies they are able to imagine the deaths of their own noble overlords. Such grim musings do not go unnoticed by other Chaos Knights, but are tolerated nonetheless. After all, it is the hatred of their station that makes war dogs so eager to prove their worth in battle. To control the smaller knights, unity with the Throne Mechanicum is not required. Instead, a device known as Helm Mechanicum is used for the transmission of the pilot's synoptic commands via servo motors. Additionally, it subjugates the owner, binding his conscious and subconscious thoughts to the mind of the suzerain. Thus, the Lord can replace the pilot's personal desires with his own at any moment. It is this technology that transforms the smaller knights into utterly loyal squires. As with the Throne Mechanicum, only the most formidable warriors can merge with the helm. However, it lacks many of the techno-sorcerous devices that protect against corruption. Therefore, smaller knights far more frequently give themselves over to chaos than their lords. Warriors showing signs of vicious deviations are usually tracked down and killed by their kin. If a noble knight survives the destruction of his machine, he is pulled from the wreckage and burned at the stake, drowned or quartered, and all mentions of his betrayal are erased from the family history. But it has also happened that the desecration of several helms in the Mechanicum led to the fall from grace of an entire knight house. The connection allowing suzerains to control their squires became a channel through which warp filth spread, turning barons and baronesses, high kings and queens into febrile barbarians. Ancient mechanical joints that had been ritually oiled for scores of centuries now spark and crackle as they are driven into motion. Plasma reactors roar with fury as they are fired into overdrive to supply the Chaos Knights with the immense power they need to loose their wrath. As the Chaos Knights advance, they tilt their ion shields to the fore, the better to ward off the enemy's incoming fire before they charge headlong into the fray. Gone are concerns of strategic forethought or target prioritization, and in their place is the predatory desire to wreak indiscriminate slaughter, to torment those too weak to fight back, or to claim the most magnificent trophy from the enemy in the name of personal glory. If a loyalist knight is akin to its noble's valiant steed, Chaos Knights are closer to rabid warhounds, their fallen noble pilots fighting constantly to retain dominance over their hate-filled war engine and force it to obey their will. Drooling blood or acidic oils, ocular lenses burning with murder lust and hulls wreathed in miasmal fumes or crackling hellfires, it is clear to all who look upon Chaos Knights that whatever nobility resided within these deranged war engines, it has long soured into hate and madness. Some bodies within the Imperium stringently resist the notion that Chaos Knights could possibly exist, and more than one internecine doctrinal conflict has erupted upon Adeptus Mechanicus forged worlds whose tech magi found themselves divided on this point. Regardless of such willful self-delusion, the Ordo Hereticus has produced grimoires in which war engines have been declared Quaesta Traitoris in High Gothic and subsequently redesignated. In part, this is necessary because fallen nobles soon abandon the age-old doctrines of armament obeyed by loyalist houses, choosing instead to arm their knights with whatever combinations of weaponry best suit their preferred methods of murder. Chaos-tainted armigers are known as war dogs. The lightest walkers of the fallen noble houses, they are also the most wanton in their savagery. They seek out unprotected flanks and isolated enemies, and crush whatever resistance can be brought to bear against them. The longer a Chaos Knight has been corrupted, the more physically warped it becomes. Internal mechanisms burst through its outer carapace, winding together to form rows of irregular spikes. Gun muzzles sprout teeth and gauntleted fists curl into cruel claws. In extreme cases, the structure of the towering machine contorts into new configurations, legs bending backwards on mutated joints, Vox grills splitting into a snarling maw. Known as abhorrent class knights, these deformed engines are nightmares of metal and flesh. They lope hungrily towards wherever the fighting is thickest, annihilating all before them with streams of gunfire and brutal swings of their close-quarters armaments. So twisted are these abhorrent class knights, both in form and spirit. Certain Ordo Hereticus Inquisitors have speculated they may have been created from STC machines corrupted by the Dark Mechanicum. However, as grotesque as the exterior of a Chaos Knight becomes, the cockpit where the pilot sits enthroned is even more horrific. In many knights, the fallen noble is fused bodily to the throne Mechanicum, their flesh melding with the surrounding metal, their neurons parasitized by manifold dendritic relays. As the mechanical suit around them absorbs ever more corrupting psychic energy, the pilot is physically warped into a being of pure chaos. Some are absorbed completely by their throne Mechanicum. Their body peels open like a rotten carcass, forming a cage of splayed ribs and exposed organs inside which the next pilot can be seated. Over multiple generations, such corrupted thrones take on the appearance of a morbid rose, with layer upon layer of fleshy fronds sprouting from them, each with a dim portion of the original pilot's sentience remaining. Others pilots devolve into chaos spawn while atop their thrones. Transformed into amorphous beasts comprised of horribly mutated muscle and bone, they thrash in a state of abject insanity. Yet a portion of their consciousness remains held within the throne, allowing them to still control their knight suit and experience the true horror of their own existence. To maintain the integrity of their Chaos Knight suits over the course of countless brutal wars, fallen nobles rely on the corrupted artisans known as idolaters. Like those whom they serve, idolaters are an aberrant offshoot of peoples loyal to the Imperium, where the sacristan orders are trained by the Adeptus Mechanicus, inducted into the holy mysteries of the Omnicia, so that they might minister to the knights of the noble houses. Idolaters learn their craft within the screaming soul forges of the Dark Mechanicum. Through diabolic rituals, they entreat the entities that dwell within the warp, sacrificing living victims and mighty machines on great cog-shaped altars. Through such practices, they glean knowledge of how Chaos Knights function, and, more importantly, they learn how to desecrate the ostensibly incorruptible technologies of the throne's Mechanicum. Oftentimes there will be multiple cabals of idolaters dwelling on each fallen knight world, each with the ability to repair battle damage sustained by the mechanical suits. The power of these cabals waxes and wanes with the services they can provide to the fallen noble house. Some know the secrets to performing mecha-inductive rituals that will vastly augment a prominent knight's power. Others may be able to subjugate their liege nobles' rivals through the installation of psychic yokes and spiritual shackles. Then there are those idolaters who have learnt the sorcerous ways of the warp and can provide glimpses of the future so that a knight despot can better direct their next campaign of terror. Competition between cabals is encouraged by the corrupted nobility, and it is common for wars to break out amongst opposing groups of idolaters. Should a cabal fall out of favour with the fallen nobles they serve, their flayed corpses may be used to decorate the fallen house's knight suits. However, such actions are not taken lightly, for to incur the ire of the idolaters is to invite a nightmarish demise. Many a fallen noble who has slaughtered an idolater has subsequently been devoured by their own knight suit, or has had their soul ripped to screaming pieces by a warp surge within their throne Mechanicum. The most cunning fallen nobles, therefore, ensure that the idolaters in their service have some other target upon whom such malice is likely to fall.